Welcome to this presentation of the Potter Hotel in Burton, Mound, as seen through vintage postcards and photographs. My name is George Sampanis, and I will be your host as we open a window into Santa Barbara's past. In 1901, a small group of influential community leaders took on the task of converting Santa Barbara into an all-year pleasure and health resort. Other California cities were busy building palatial hotels to lure tourists. The Coronado to the south in San Diego and the Del Monte to the north in Monterey were attracting visitors summers and winters and holding their guests for longer stays. Milo M. Potter, owner of the Van Nuys Hotel in Los Angeles, was approached to investigate Santa Barbara as a site for a deluxe luxury hotel. He was quick to see the potential for a new hotel in Santa Barbara, with the railroad closing the gap between San Francisco and Los Angeles. For 14 years, travelers between these cities were forced to make other arrangements. The 50-mile gap between the communities of Surf in the north and Elwood in the south was finally closed, presenting new opportunities for the city of Santa Barbara. Within 2 weeks, he made several visits here and chose a 36-acre tract bordered by Chapala, Montecito, Castillo, and what is now Cabrillo Boulevard. The property, known as Burton Mound, was the location of an ancient Chumash village and burial site. The site also contained several springs, both hot and cold. Today, if one were standing on Cabrillo Boulevard looking north, immediately to the right of Sambo's restaurant, they would see a parallel set of palm trees, the area now called Ambassador Park. At the other end, looking south, on the left side, they would see a bronze plaque. The plaque commemorates the Burton Mound as the location of an ancient Indian village called Sayuxtin. When Portola first set foot on Santa Barbara soil, he found this village with 600 or so Chumash inhabitants living in and around the mound. The location was swampy and contained several natural springs, one Sweetwater for drinking and sulfur springs which the natives utilized for sweat houses. The Indians were affectionate, warm, and good-natured. Sadly, some 50 years later, the village had all but disappeared. Here is a closer look of the mound and its location. It was about 30 feet high and about 150 feet in diameter, surrounded by a salt marsh on 3 sides. Before we continue with the Potter Hotel, we will look at the interesting lives of 4 different owners of the mound prior to the construction of the Potter. In 1833, Joseph Chapman, the first American-born permanent settler in Santa Barbara, bought the Burton Mound property. He built a small adobe, interestingly, on a bed of sheet lead to prevent seepage and odors emanating from the sulfur springs. Chapman had first arrived in Santa Barbara in 1818. The year before, the reluctant pirate had been shanghaied in Hawaii and impressed as an unwilling crewman of Bouchard the privateer. Bouchard launched a raid to plunder the Ortega Ranch, El Refugio, where Chapman was wounded and captured by Presidio soldiers. The prisoner was treated for his wounds at the ranch by 16-year-old Guadalupe Ortega, who fell in love with him, and 4 years later they were married. In the meantime, he was placed in custody of the Padres, who made good use of his many skills. Chapman led an interesting and diverse life. Born in Boston in 1784, he died in Santa Barbara in 1858. In between those 74 years, he was a carpenter, a blacksmith, a pirate, a shipbuilder, a mill builder, and a jack of all trades. California historian Hugh Bancroft says, and I quote, "Among the earliest pioneers of early California, there was none more attractive character, no more popular and useful man than Joseph Chapman, the Yankee." End quote. He built the wool cloth mill that is pictured here. Today, it is still standing at the Mission Santa Ynez in Solvang. At the Mission San Gabriel, Chapman built this gristmill pictured here. He also assisted in building the Plaza Church, the first church in Los Angeles. It too is still standing and today is known as the Church of Our Lady of the Angels. Utilizing his mastery of mechanics and his experience around ships, he built the 60-ton schooner Guadalupe, pictured on the left. In the mountains some 30 miles west of the San Gabriel Mission, he personally selected the best trees, cut them down, had them dragged down the mountain, hewn into planks, assembled them into several sections at the mission, and then transported the sections to the harbor at San Pedro, where the final assembly and successful launch took place. In 1835, the multi-talented craftsman sold his Mound property and adobe to Benjamin Foxon. Chapman and his wife Guadalupe are pictured here a decade later. Foxon enlarged and redecorated the adobe. For a time, he used the building as a sort of hotel sanitarium to help sailors recovering from scurvy. 12 years later, he was instrumental in assisting General Fremont and his American forces by telling them of a shortcut over the San Marcos Pass. There is some controversy as to just what happened. One version has Foxon warning Fremont that the Mexican army in Santa Barbara was laying in wait at Gaviota Pass, ready to roll down rocks and boulders on him and his army. This monument supports that position. The other version has the Mexican army in Los Angeles and that Gaviota Pass was flooded and could not be crossed. Either way, whatever version is correct, the general took Santa Barbara for the Americans without firing a shot. In the 1840s, George Nidever purchased the property, and he lived there with his wife, Maria Simferosa. Another of the early American settlers, his background included being a mountain man, an explorer, a trapper, and a sailor. The Nidevers moved to a new home several blocks away in the late 1840s. During the 1850s, he spent considerable time on the Channel Islands tending his cattle and sheep operations on Santa Rosa. He visited San Nicolas, a remote island some 75 miles from the Santa Barbara mainland. It is shown in the lower center of the map. The story of the lost woman of San Nicolas intrigued him, and during the next 3 years, he scoured the desolate island looking for clues to her existence. The inhabitants of the remote island were most likely of the Tonga tribe, which also inhabited Catalina. Surely they were not Chumash. The tribe had been decimated by marauding Indians from the north, the Aleuts. In 1833, for their safety, the Padres sent a ship to evacuate the remnants, which now numbered about 25, mostly women and children. From Nidever's memoirs, I quote, "Having got all the Indians to the beach, one of the women went back for her child. A strong wind came up, and fearing safety for the ship, it put off. After unloading her passengers at San Pedro, the ship immediately was called away to San Francisco. The story of her abandonment was known up and down the coast, but through a series of unfortunate circumstances, she was forgotten and thought to have died from hunger. 18 years had passed before she was found alive and in good health." Her story begs to be told in detail, but not here. When found, she was willingly brought to the mainland, to the Nidever's home, where she became a celebrity. Santa Barbarans in awe brought food, clothing, and gifts to the woman who had survived all those years on the desolate island. Unfortunately, after 18 years of eating raw blubber, fish, and wild roots, and now feasting on cooked meat, fruits, and pastries, her digestive system could not handle the change. 7 months later, the lone woman of San Nicolas Island died in the Nidever's home. In subsequent presentations, we will hear lots more of George Nidever's amazing life and his impact on local history as a sea captain, hunter, and explorer. In 1860, Lewis Burton purchased the property and together with his wife lived there for the next 20 years. Henceforth, it became known as Burton Mound. Let us now get back to the Potter Hotel. The Potter Hotel opened for business in 1903 and was in operation until 1921. Pictured in this illustration is the Burton adobe with its red roof tiles. It was used as a combination general store, post office, and residence. It was surrounded by orchards of pear, peach, fig, and olive trees. Groundbreaking ceremonies commenced on January 19, 1902. This was Milo Potter's birthday and his lucky number. He had bought the Van Nuys Hotel on January 19th. He met his future wife, Nellie Jones, a charming widow, on November 19th, 1901. He had hired her at the Van Nuys Hotel on January 19th, and exactly 1 year after breaking ground, the grand opening was on January 19th, 1903. John C. Austin was the architect of the new grandiose hotel. His later architectural credits include the Griffith Observatory, the Hollywood Masonic Temple, and the Los Angeles City Hall, along with many others. The 6-story palatial hotel opened for business after an expenditure of $1.5 million. It had 600 rooms to accommodate 1,000 guests, including 100 rooms for the maids and valets of the affluent clientele. There was a separate hotel to house the 500 employees of the Potter. The grand opening was Santa Barbara's most important social affair since the state visit of Princess Louise 20 years earlier. Anyone who was anyone was there, and according to one report, there was more money at the Potter that day than there was in Fort Knox. The hotel and its tall towers became a landmark for sailors and landlubbers. The Potter had its own post office, and postcards can still be found bearing the Santa Barbara Station stamp. For guests arriving by motor car, a garage was available for Cadillacs, Pierce Arrows, and their Stanley steamers. For those arriving by rail, the rear of the property abutted the Southern Pacific Railroad depot, and rail sidings were available for the private railway cars of their millionaire clients. When the Potter first opened, the room rates were $3 and up in summer and $4 and up in winter. This ad from the San Francisco Chronicle of 1908 shows quite a jump in price to $5 a day. The main dining room had a capacity for 750 patrons and was supported by a permanent staff of 125 waiters. Over $50,000 was spent on silver service alone, including 120 dozen sets of knives, forks, and spoons, each bearing the Potter crest. Notice the balcony in the left center of this postcard. It was strategically located above the doors to the kitchen, where up to 20 musicians could play music and cover up any noise emanating from the kitchen. Let's take a look at their luncheon menu of February 17, 1908. I've highlighted a few of the items, like pickled lamb's tongue. My, how lunch has changed over the last century. Note the suckling pig and the squab. They were raised at the Potter Ranch and Farm located in Goleta. Most of the Potter's vegetables were grown either on the hotel grounds or on the farm in Goleta. This postcard of the artichoke garden is on the hotel grounds, where guests were allowed to pick their own vegetables. This view also gives us a glimpse of the Dibley Mansion located in the upper right-hand corner and the location of today's City College. The back of this postcard reads, "There are 175 blooded cows on our ranch for supplying the Potter Hotel with milk, cream, butter, and cheese." A little bit of humor on the back of this postcard where it reads, "Little Tales from the Hotel Potter, Santa Barbara, California, a picturesque story about a good table." The squab were milk-fed for supplying the Potter table exclusively. The ranch had 60,000 pigeons and was purported to be the largest squab ranch in the world. There were several thousand chickens raised on the ranch for their eggs and to be eaten broiled or fried or for chicken pot pies. Another example of Potter's humor, where he states on the back of this postcard, "This is one of the exact reasons for the Potter's superlative table supply." Going back inside the hotel, these two postcard views show the lobby in daylight and in the evening. One Potter Hotel guest wrote, "The dining room is an immense dome, and one official told me it contained 4,400 electric lights. They were just like twinkling stars." One can easily picture the dining room scene by looking at the lighting in the lobby above. This postcard view is taken from the rear of the hotel and shows the convenient walkway to the train depot. As mentioned earlier, rail sightings were available for the wealthy guests who arrived in their luxuriously furnished private rail cars. These images display the private rail car currently on display near our famous fig tree. It is identified as Southern Pacific number 142, Santa Barbara. Many who owned private rail cars visited our city during the Golden Age. An abbreviated list of the wealthy tycoons from the East who were clientele of the Potter follow. Rockefeller made his money in oil, Carnegie in steel, Swift, Armour, and Cudahy in meatpacking, Gould in railroads, Spreckels, sugar, Studebaker, automobiles, Billings, industrialist, Knapp, chemicals, Fleischmann, yeast, Peabody, Arrow shirts, and Murphy, Palomino horses. Most of these tycoons remained to establish fabulous estates and became generous benefactors to our Santa Barbara community. Hundreds of politicians, entertainers, educators, foreign-born dignitaries, and other world-famous celebrities were welcome guests at the hotel. I just love this postcard and credit my wife Carol for the humorous caption. Milo M. Potter was a man of action and a public relations genius. To many, he was known as Mile a Minute Potter. The story is told of an English nobleman who telegraphed that he wanted to visit the hotel in 4 weeks, if the cottage were available. Potter replied that it was available and he would reserve it for the period requested by the nobleman. He then immediately began to build the cottage. It was ready when the Englishman arrived. The cottage still stands as a multi-family dwelling on Bath Street. As a PR stunt, he brought a Frenchman, Didier Masson, and his plane for a one-man air show. It was the first plane to fly over Santa Barbara. Didier, his plane, and a corner of the hotel are visible in this postcard. Masson took off from Hope Ranch and climbed to an altitude of 3,000 feet. As he approached the hotel, he dropped to 1,000 feet, circled around, and then came back within 15 feet of the hotel's tower, where a delegation of Japanese were watching from the roof garden, shown in this postcard. They were heard screaming, "Bonsai, bonsai, attack, attack." The morning press headline read, "Man Bird Sails Over City to Ocean and Potter." Here is another view of Didier Masson's plane with Stearns Wharf visible at the top of the photo. Didier was quite the pioneer aviator. He was the first to deliver a newspaper by air, and that happened between Los Angeles and San Bernardino in 1911. He was hired on as a mercenary by the Mexican revolutionists and was the first in the Western Hemisphere to ever drop a bomb on a surface ship. Then, during World War I, he served as a pilot in the French military. His engine cut out during a dogfight where he, remarkably still, downed his German opponent and then glided down to safety behind the French lines. While on the subject of pioneer aviators and airplanes, this postcard shows two of the Lockheed brothers' airplanes on the beach in front of the Potter Hotel. The brothers made quite a bit of money flying their Model G airplane at the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco. They charged tourists and pioneer enthusiasts $1 an hour for an airplane excursion. The plane was disassembled and brought to Santa Barbara. The brothers decided to stay in our city and started the Lockheed Airplane Manufacturing Company. The first plane actually built in Santa Barbara was their Model F-1, the Flying Boat, a 10-passenger airplane. The company that got its start in Santa Barbara was later renamed Lockheed Corporation, and today is one of our nation's leading aerospace companies. Another of my presentations is devoted to the Lockheed story. Milo was involved in every detail of the hotel, including its landscaping. Everything required his approval. The landscaping was plush and extensive, complete with a park, winding walkways, and a variety of year-round fauna and flora. There were beautiful lawns and blooming plants, including 30,000 rose bushes. Yes, I said 30,000. Plus acres of lilies and violets and a mile of red geraniums made a lasting impression, as the following postcard views taken during different seasons and angles will attest. Now here's a rare view of the Potter Hotel. Can anyone guess why? Yes, it's the storm clouds. Rarely were postcards published that showed bad weather in Santa Barbara. Now this postcard, showing people bathing on January 1st, New Year's Day, is much better advertising and publicity for the Potter. In this postcard, you can see the steamer Santa Rosa approaching Stearns Wharf, the Potter Hotel, and if you look carefully at the right-hand side, the tower of the Dibley Mansion, the current site of our city college. And in this view, the Potter and the railway tracks at the beach, terminating at the Y on Stearns Wharf. Here is a closer look, and in the left center of the card, you can view what was to become the future Highway 101. Getting back to the Potter grounds for a look at the Deer Park, the Palm House, and the Fernery. In addition to the post office, there were several businesses located within the hotel, including I. Magnin, Walton Jewelry, E.F. Hutton, the Great Wardrobe, and Mahasey's Art and Fur, shown in this postcard. The hotel had sailboats, glass-bottom boats, and excursion boats available for the guests. At another location, now in Hope Ranch, the Potter Country Club had a racetrack, polo grounds, squash courts, and tennis courts were also available for the guests. It is believed that the lady in the feathered hat is Milo's wife Nellie. The country club was located on what is now 800 Coruscant Road in Hope Ranch. Later, it became a gun club and is now a $3 million 11-bedroom residence. The hotel was the focus of activities throughout the South Coast, and it played host to the visit of the Great White Fleet in 1908. This postcard captures the Great White Fleet as it approaches Santa Barbara. I believe it was photographed from the Clark Estate. On April 25th through April 30th, 1908, our city hosted the Great White Fleet, which was in the process of circumnavigating the world. After the Spanish-American War, President Theodore Roosevelt had ordered the Navy to upgrade its fleet. Between 1904 and 1907, 11 new dreadnoughts were built. Today, they're called battleships. He ordered the fleet of 16 battleships to circumnavigate the globe. In doing so, he sought to demonstrate growing American military power and to show the world that the United States was a power to be reckoned with. Because the ship hulls were painted white, except for the gilded scroll work on the bow, which was painted gold, the fleet became known as the Great White Fleet, and that was an identification that caught on to this day. The 16 battleships are shown here spewing soot. They used coal for fuel, which back then was referred to as black diamonds. Among the 34,000 men who served on the Great White Fleet were junior officers that would become household names during World War II, including Nimitz, Halsey, Spruance, and Stark. During the 14-month period from December 1907 to February 1909, the Great White Fleet traveled 45,000 miles via the route outlined on this map. It sailed to the following countries: Trinidad, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines, Japan, China, Ceylon, Egypt, and Gibraltar. On the left is the USS Pittsburgh, anchored in Venice. On the right, it shows our US sailors on camels by the pyramids in Egypt. Looks like fun, but there were several humanitarian efforts performed by the fleet, and I will highlight one: providing assistance to earthquake victims in Italy. The earthquake struck on the morning of December 28, 1908. Early aid was immediate and direct from the Great White Fleet. The fleet was in Egypt when it received news of the Messina earthquake. The USS Connecticut arrived in Messina with thousands of pounds of food, medicine, and provided temporary shelter for the survivors. Some 17,000 people were pulled from the rubble, their lives saved primarily by the heroic efforts of the combined search and rescue crews of the U.S. ships and those of other nations. Estimates of the death toll from this horrific event range up to 250,000. The fleet's around-the-world cruise had many substantial results, both diplomatically and technically. Diplomatically, it satisfied our country's desire to be recognized as a world power. It was demonstrated that the United States was capable of projecting its influence anywhere in the world. Our relations with the countries visited were improved or established positively. The most important improvement was with Japan, the main diplomatic target from the beginning. The visit by the fleet produced the main thrust for a treaty where both countries agreed to maintain the status quo in the Pacific and to respect each other's possessions there. Operationally, the cruise was a resounding success. There were no serious repair or maintenance problems, nor were there any breakdowns or serious accidents. Here, the fleet is pictured anchored in Santa Barbara. The photograph is a little faded, but if you locate Stern's Wharf, the battleships are visible slightly to the right and above. This postcard captures Division 1 of the parade with 1,600 Great White Fleet sailors marching in their dress whites. And in this postcard, the sailors march on the boulevard with rifles having been decorated with flowers by the young ladies of Santa Barbara. In the parade's Division 2, pomp and pageantry abound with flower-covered floats, horse-drawn carriages, and decorated motor cars. Back to the Potter for a view of the sun parlor where guests relaxed, overlooking the beautiful Pacific. Here we see Milo in the moonlight, relaxing on the roof veranda. The sun has set. On February 19th, 1919, Potter sold the hotel. 19 continued to be his lucky number, and he retired to his Montecito estate. The new owners renamed the hotel the Belvedere. A mere 7 months later, it was sold again and renamed the Ambassador, becoming one of the chain's hotels. On the 13th of April 1921, with 50-mile-per-hour winds pounding the waterfront, the Ambassador burned to the ground in 3 hours. Arson was suspected, but never proven, and miraculously, there were no casualties. In the short span of 25 months, the hotel had changed hands twice and was then completely destroyed by fire. These two postcard views of the Potter in flames, followed by the Arlington Hotel disaster in 1925, sealed Santa Barbara's Gilded Age forever. A sad ending for what was once one of California's grandest hotels. A distraught Milo Potter sent this telegram to a friend just hours after the fire. It sums up the Potter era in just a few heartbreaking words. My life's work, the Potter Hotel, is in ashes.